Доброго дня всім.
Good afternoon, everybody, to all those who are watching us. And on behalf of the Ukraine Crisis Media Center Board, I would like to welcome you today and express my satisfaction with today's topic, with the fact that we are raising it today. The President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, raised the topic of NATO in his recent interview to the American mass media, and he asked a question to the President of the United States why Ukraine is not in NATO, why not Ukraine is not the NATO member still, and we have Ms. Klympush-Tsintsadze with us, who is Member of Parliament, and Mr. Stefanchuk, who is Deputy Speaker of the Parliament, who is with us today. They would confirm my words that this is not just the position in the Constitution of Ukraine, but also this is one of the top priorities of our foreign policy, and this is one of the factors of security in Europe. This is one of the top goals for Ukraine, and our constitution sets this as one of our targets, the future accession to NATO. And despite the very attractive topic, which sounds a bit traditional for this country, culturally traditional, why Ukraine is not the NATO member by today, who has to be blamed and what to do. These are traditional questions in our history, and today actually we are looking not only on Ukraine, we are looking at the situation in the world. The policies of the United States, the events across the Atlantic, and today our interlocutors are people who are professionals with extensive experience in the foreign policies, and they perhaps will agree with me that this path to NATO today requires more decisive steps. I would like to start with the statement that we are happy to welcome here today Her Excellency Ms. Larisa Galadza, the Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Canada in Ukraine. Actually, Ms. Galadza represents the embassy, which is in a very close contact with the Ukrainian government, and on the one hand, on the other hand, you are very much involved into the NATO affairs, and you might express your opinion, your professional opinion on the matter. And I'm also very happy that we have a person who is representative of an institution who is responsible for implementation of the policies via legislative initiatives. And that is, I'm very happy that we have today Mr. Stefanchuk, Deputy Speaker of the Parliament, First Deputy Speaker of the Parliament, and also I'm happy that we will today listen to Ms. Klympush-Tsintsadze, who is not only an MP but also chairperson of the Parliamentary Committee on European Integration. So the floor is yours, Mr. Stefanchuk. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I first of all would like to thank for this opportunity to participate in this public discussion organized by the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center and which deals with this complicated issue, this interesting issue why Ukraine is not a member, the NATO member till now. Actually, this is very peculiar for Ukrainians. We always try to find who is to be blamed instead of looking forward for better solutions. Let us think today what we have to do to exclude the possibility of this same question in the future. That is what we have to do to become a member of NATO in the future. The NATO accession, NATO membership remains one of the top priorities of our foreign policy, and actually, this comprises three tasks for us covered by this topic. First of all, close cooperation with the Parliamentary Assembly of NATO countries. The second task is to set favorable legislative preconditions for future accession, and the third is parliamentary scrutiny, parliamentary supervision of the policy implementation. I may recollect those times when Ukraine was represented in the NATO Parliamentary Assembly with a delegation that enjoyed the status of a permanent member, although Ukraine is not the permanent member. And we may recollect the Charter on Special Partnership, also the Verkhovna Rada Charter about special status to Ukraine back in 2002, then sessions of the intra-parliamentary councils of the NATO countries and Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, together with the NATO structural subdivisions. We had special sessions with NATO PA subcommittees. I may also recollect other dimensions of our parliamentary cooperation. I may recollect the Vilnius declaration about support to Ukraine, then the spring Budapest session, where again NATO expressed its support to Ukraine, then the resolution about support of security in the Black Sea. Also, I may refer to the report of Senator Corke from Canada, which was presented at the 64th NATO Parliamentary Assembly, and also I would refer to the June session of NATO Parliamentary Assembly of 2020, and then in November 2020 in Athens, the next declaration of NATO strategy till 2020 was passed, and Ukraine also had its place in it. So for us, there is a big target to transit to the standards and norms for NATO countries, and in this context I may recollect the laws on the defense procurements for defense purposes, the strategy of the country, etc. Also the law on the security service of Ukraine, which was passed recently, and today we have passed the new piece of legislation which deprives the special services from interference into the economic and business aspects. Discussing the priorities in legislative work for the next year, we discussed that around 60 major pieces of legislation had to be passed during this new year. This was our joint vision with Ms. Tsintsadze, who is head of the parliamentary committee, and with Ms. Stefanchuk, who is vice Prime Minister in the European integration. So it suggests that almost each parliamentary week we should discuss and pass around 4 or 5 bills aimed at the at Ukraine's approximation to the accession. In June 2020, Ukraine had to host the Parliamentary Assembly of NATO countries, but because of COVID-19, it was postponed till May next year, and keeping this in mind, I would again thank you for this invitation and assure you that the Parliament of Ukraine remains the for a looking point for the integration of Ukraine to NATO. Thank you, Mr. Stefanchuk. We invite the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but they kindly rejected because of other events, but thank you to you for participation, and I think that MPs take it seriously to each opportunity to communicate with the civil society, and in this context today's meeting is important. Now I'm eager to give the floor to Ms. Mariana Bezugla, who unfortunately will need to leave our session early because of other commitments. Ms. Bezugla is a deputy head of the National Security, Defense and Intelligence Committee in the Parliament. Now the question to you, So, Ms. Bazukla, quite often your committee deals with the important aspects of Ukrainian reforms. Could you please explain what you plan to do in your committee in terms of Ukraine's accession to NATO? Thank you for organizing this event. I believe this is good that such happens. Take place now and then, and it's quite useful that you involve MPs to these events, which allows us to have good communication. That's true that our committee is the leading committee when we think about accession to NATO, and from the very beginning of this convocation of the Parliament, we have set the top priorities that are to bring us closer to, that mean to approximate us to the NATO requirements. So here I would like to mention such aspects as legislative initiatives, and Mr. Stefanchuk already described that big package of bills that we have to pass in order to streamline the Ukraine's accession to NATO. So one big step was made with the passage of the law on national security, and then we had prepared a package of other laws. For example, the law on the procurements for the defense purposes, which entered into force from January 1st this year. Then I would like to emphasize that all those laws which we pass in the context of NATO integration, these are actually the packages of laws which introduce considerable changes and sets the rules of the game for big spheres of and big sectors. I would not go deeply into this area about the defense sphere. The second package of the necessary legislative initiatives is dealing with the intelligence, which is important for the level of awareness, level of information at the country's leadership, and for efficient coordination with other partners of Ukraine. Quite recently, we have presented the White Book of Ukrainian Intelligence. This was a report about Ukrainian intelligence service. Of course, this is a rather sensitive topic in terms of the classified information, but nevertheless, we tried to describe it to the society. Then we're seriously thinking about parliamentary supervision and thinking about special committee in the parliament to supervise the defense and security sector. We also are thinking very seriously about the amendments to the law on national defense and security. We had also prepared some amendments, and here our committee cooperated with other committees. We have recently passed the law about parliamentary supervision. Also, I would like to mention the project on transformation of the intelligence service. this is quite urgent issue. And unfortunately, many convocations of the Verkhovna Rada try to approach to this issue, and almost 30 years were spent in discussions. And after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there were many chances to transform the intelligence service, but unfortunately, this reform wasn't even started. We now can only imagine what would happen if we were to transfer to change the intelligence service some 10-15 years ago. And we believe that transformation of the service would approximate us to NATO accession. So the first reading of the draft law is now over, and also the next priority for us for this year will be setting the rules of the game for the handling of the classified information in line with the NATO standards. Then the passage of NATO standards in terms of some ranks like surgeons and some other ranks to bring them in compliance in Ukrainian army with the NATO. And also our committee is now continuously involved into the parliamentary supervision over procurement for the defense issues. And now I'm eager to answer your questions, Ivani, because I will need to leave soon. Miss Mariana, I would like to say that the white books, they're not novelty. They are not novelty, but this is novelty in the intelligence. Yes, but let us produce the new white book from the Ministry of Defense, for the Ministry of Defense. Now I would like to ask two questions which were asked in our social networks by our listeners. In my opinion, recent years produced the overall international opinion that recent steps made by Ukraine in terms of the international intelligence were rather contradictory. Here I would recollect the Wagner's group case and the next, how we should deal with the commissioned murders. I understand that maybe you do not wish to explain in much details what you are doing, but would you please mention in general what tools do you have to tackle those issues? Here I would like to point out to the White Book of Ukrainian Intelligence, where we broadly used the Estonian experience, and I will start my answer from the second question. Just a week ago, we had a joint meeting of the Security Committee and the Intelligence Committee, where we studied the rules of procedure and we studied the rules of procedure and tried to improve the procedure and invited the SBU leadership to respond to the parliamentary question. And here we had to discuss the issues of access to these meetings, classified information, closed hearings, etc. So this process comprised two aspects. The first was a report about the situation, and at this part all the meeting participants signed the confidentiality agreements, and the second part of it was even the classified information agreements. What we found out that inside the security service of Ukraine for almost 10 years, the negative selection process had been existent, and during that period they accumulated a lot of improper functions which should not be part of the Ukrainian security service. The lack of good network of agents, foreign agents, also insufficient funding of staff, which is the worst among all the enforcement agencies. And I do not mention the budget for development. That all resulted in the things which you had mentioned. Despite that, the committee had taken into consideration the situations that you mentioned, and we very closely follow the investigation and further hearings, further proceedings on this case in court. By the way, this case of the Wagner team is being investigated by the security service itself. That's why I do not have a brief answer to this question. We have to focus on the issue of transformation. We have to implement this transformation. We have to allocate money to implement the reform. As to the Wagner's team case, a couple of things. This would be the issue for the committee on supervision over intelligence service. They have to investigate such cases which became notorious cases, the cases of loud social interest. Unfortunately, in the parliament, many political forces try to use this case for their own purposes. in our committee, there is one of the positions that it was just the informational subversive action from the Russian Federation point of view, and that this should be characterized as parts of the hybrid aggression. I would express my own opinion, not as a politician, because I'm not politician. I believe that there was the secret operation, and that unfortunately there was a leak of information, disclosure, unlawful disclosure of information, which undermined the credit of our partners. You cannot say this. I have my own sources, by the way. And thank you for the fact that you mentioned that you try to create tools which would prevent similar situations to happen in future. The negative selection that you mentioned creates or shades a spot on the entire service. If we say that there was only negative selection, then we would not see such big numbers of people who rescued their lives at the front line and in hybrid war, which started in 2014. And Sbu provided a lot of proofs that there were Russian weapons in Ukraine, that there was Russian military equipment, and we please do not say that for 30 years nothing had been done, and no, of course, I did not mean all the employees. I only mean that the service is in pathological situation. I'm very skeptical about the professionals with a huge experience in Sbu, but we can positively speak about separate counterintelligence operations which were successful, and we are speaking about the reform of the system and about Operation Wagner. There is nothing personal. Of course, you may comment publications in mass media. I mentioned as a person who is responsible, I could assure you that this is an example of provocation from Russian Federation. Thank you very much for your statement. Of course, this implementation of NATO standards is not possible without cooperation with NATO. Ms. Mariana, to whom we are very thankful, mentioned the Committee on Intelligence in the Parliamentary Committee, the leading committee in NATO reform, but actually this brings in many other committees. Since we are discussing today accession to the international organization, we should keep in mind that tango is a dance for two partners, and that's why we are very much interested to hear the opinion of our NATO partners. With this, I would like to invite Her Excellency Ms. Galadza, who is not only ambassador of the of Canada in Ukraine, but who is also a contact person on NATO issues for Ukraine. What would you advise Ukraine to do, at what to focus in terms of strategic vision? How can we strengthen our cooperation with NATO today? We have simultaneous translation, and it's up to you. I'm very grateful to you for your perfect Ukrainian.
I'm really glad to be here. It's a big week, and I think it's also a week to take a moment to recognize the hard work that was done 2 years ago to make these changes in Ukraine's constitution that are so defining of what Ukraine is, who Ukraine is, and where Ukraine, the path that Ukraine is on. So thank you for inviting me for this particular event. You've asked about what interactions should take place in the short term and what concrete results need to be shown in the short term. I'll take those in turn. I think the interactions that Ukraine has with NATO are actually quite excellent. I think that they're happening at all levels. I think that the signals, it's all about the signals sent one way and received the other way. And Ukraine looks like it's all in. And I think that the frequency of the high level engagement demonstrates that. I think that the president is seen as not only leading this, but also owning it. And that's very important for the domestic audience and for the international audience. Other important signals that have been sent, obviously, the Enhanced Opportunities Partners program that was extended in June, and it's clear that Ukraine has embraced that and is taking the steps to take full advantage of it. I think that signals coming this way, NATO's statements about Black Sea security, consistently talking about Black Sea security is very important, and I think from the Rada, from the ministry, and from the armed forces of Ukraine, consistent indications that things are on the move. I think as Ukraine plans for the meetings this week and plans also for the meetings that will take place later on this year, I think it's really important to recognize where this question of Ukraine's membership fits into the broader plan of what Ukraine is, of what NATO is doing. It's a busy agenda. It is an urgent agenda. It is a complicated agenda. And so a degree of self-awareness about what's happening in the greater NATO context, I think, is really important. About the concrete results that Ukraine needs to show, I think it's really simple. I think Ukraine needs to just keep showing that it's doing its homework. Це домашнє завдання, яке ви згадували. It's doing its homework to keep removing the practical barriers to NATO membership. And I think that there are still, I would point to at least sort of three big areas where that are very evident on allies' radar about what needs to be done and where progress needs to be made in Ukraine. And each of these three components has both a legislative component to it. I was really glad to hear both Pan Ruslan and Pani Iryna speak about this, and they have an institutional component. And quite frankly, I'm not sure which is the more difficult one. But anyway, just to say they're complicated. So the first area obviously is Sbu Reform. Big step forward last week, and we welcomed that, but there's a long road to go on Sbu Reform, and that is really important, and a lot more legislative change, and there the institutional change can be very difficult. But I think Ukraine is up for it. Keep making the progress. The second area is on procurement and defense reform. Procurement and defense industry reform. The corporatization, the closing the space for corruption, the opening of the opportunities for allies, all that needs to happen there. And again, allies are very conscious of this particular sector of reforms. And the third area is democratic oversight. Again, we heard both previous speakers talk about this. And the work here, I would say, is very urgent. On the one hand, it's with the armed forces of Ukraine and the Ministry of Defense to institutionalize those governance mechanisms that allow them to say, we have strong accountability in our institutions. Not just take someone's word for it, not lose everything and start again when there's a new head of the institution, but strongly institutionalized governance, accountability, authority, responsibility. Everyone knows what they're doing, and that reform takes place inside the institutions. The other place that work needs to be done is in the Rada, so that the Rada can fulfill its important role in democratic oversight. And I'm really pleased that last week Canada announced a project to do just that, to work with the defense and security and law enforcement committees to increase capacity for playing that accountability role. So that's the short term, I think. The short term is a continuation of what's been happening all along, and just continue to plug away. Continue to get rid of those excuses that some of the allies might want to have for continuing for delaying membership, and I think that the progress on those fronts will speak volumes.
Thank you so much for that, and I use this opportunity to just thank Canada for bilateral relationship with Ukraine and support us as we have support from many other NATO countries, as United States primarily, and others, and European allies, especially now Great Britain increasing role. I also want to use this great opportunity having you in this panel, and we received many questions from Ukrainian experts and activists, activists from civil society. Just one question. It's a long discussion in Ukraine, what's more important, but it's a question about membership action plan. We know official position of NATO that's more important not discussing about institutional framework, but more important doing well in implementation of existing program. But nevertheless, if I may to ask you that question, and if you may to answer that, what condition do you personally see, what condition or conditionalities could be applied for Ukraine to think seriously about membership action plan? I do not ask you about next year or something like that, but we read many experts, Ukrainian experts, that the window of opportunity narrow, and it's not guaranteed for next decades, so it's a question of next years. So which condition or conditionalities for Ukraine to think seriously about signing or to have this membership action plan for NATO membership for Ukraine? Thank you for your answer.
That is the burning question of the week, I think, and it's a difficult one because it's not a bunch of criteria that need to be met, because fundamentally it's a political decision, and I think that to answer this question, if you want to fall back on your knowns, what do you know you can do? You can continue to plug along and implement the annual national plan, and fundamentally, it's not that much different than what a membership action plan will be. Ukraine has had the ANP since 2009. Ukraine is very ambitious every year about what it sets out to do, and that's good. There's still a lot more work. I talked about the three areas that I think are the big ones, the big ticket items that allies are watching, that Ukraine's biggest supporters in Brussels are watching, and that NATO partners here in Kyiv are watching. So membership action plan, I think that the best way to get there is to continue plugging along. Be ready for when the political window of opportunity opens. It's not about strictly defined criteria. It's about an environment that will exist that will permit that to happen. And in the meantime, there's a lot that can happen so that when it does happen, it can be quick.
Thank you. Yeah, pretty open, transparent. Thank you, Ambassador, Your Excellency, for the sharing with us your opinion. А зараз я хотів би українською перейти.
Now I would like to shift to Ukrainian. We have mentioned a lot of issues that have to be implemented. I mean, interaction between the legislative body and the government. Now I am happy to introduce a person who had extensive experience as the Vice Prime Minister on European integration in the former government, and now she is a member of Parliament and had the Euro Integration Committee in the Parliament. Why your committee is not called broad with a broader name? Today you're representing actually the parliamentary opposition, but at the same time it's quite understandable that in terms of Euro integration the parliament works in the same direction. We described today how much things are very good in Ukraine, and it created impression that tomorrow we may access NATO. What could be done on this path? What can the parliament do together with the government bodies, and how to strengthen parliamentary supervision?
I would like to use this opportunity to speak about the committee and the title of the committee. I would like to remind you that when Verkhovna Rada started its work, the 9th convocation started its work, and Yegor will confirm this. There were big discussions concerning whether we need the Committee on European Integration. And efforts were made. And opposition said that we should not cancel this committee, and we were able to preserve this committee in such a form, and a position of Vice Premier on European and Euro-Atlantic integration. It was also preserved. So this was a minimum that we were able to do at the time. And this committee, I believe it should have more opportunities, institutional capabilities, and to be able to have broader agenda concerning European and Atlantic integration. I agree with you that the Committee on National Defense and Security is one of the key institutions that are responsible for the introduction of approaches and standards of NATO in defense sector, but not the only the committee that is responsible for Euro-Atlantic integration, because I would like to remind to you that Euro-Atlantic integration is not only about security and defense. This is also about democratic procedures, about supremacy of law, efficiency of anti-corruption policies and instruments that are used for this, and this is about human rights, equality, tolerance. So, broader field of obligations of the country that aspires to be in the alliance. I would like to go back to the issue that was on the agenda of this meeting, of this roundtable. We should understand that for 30 years of independence, Ukraine repeatedly sent to the world and to Ukrainian society some mixed signals. I won't go into detail about the years. So we said that we are neutral, that we are outside any blocks. Then we sent a letter of 3 to the alliance to give us the plan of actions for the membership. And Prime Minister of Ukraine at the time came to one of the key capitals, and she said that they are not really interested in this. So in that period of time, when the window opportunities started to be open, we sent mixed signals. Then we were outside the bloc, and then in 2014, the aggression started against Ukraine. And we understood that the only way to provide for our security, the only way for development and opportunities for Ukrainian society, this is the membership in NATO and in the European Union. I'm really glad that we were able, by joint efforts, on the initiative of the President and supported by the Cabinet of Ministers in the Parliament, we were able to take this decision that everyone believed to be politicized and populist. Many people said this concerning strategic goals, that they should be envisaged by the constitutions. This is alliance membership and membership in EU. And going back to your question, Valery, today these changes to constitution, they are serious safeguard in order not to have the change of the course in Ukraine. And it is evident that the political decision Larisa mentioned, this issue of membership action plan, it depends on our home task and the signals that Ukraine sends. Many things were voiced by Ruslan and Mariana. There were achievements supported by our faction in the parliament, and we contributed in order to continue Euro-Atlantic integration of Ukraine. At the same time, the adoption of the ideal law is not enough in order to implement it. And the first serious step was made in order that SBU, the law on SBU that was adopted in the first reading, if we finalize it with all necessary amendments, if we will be able to improve this draft law, the most important in all of this is implementation. And I pose the position that the negative selection or underfinancing resulted in the fact that one of the former head of SBU, that he ordered a killing of one of the heads of SBU. This is not the negative signal concerning our prospects of NATO membership, of EU membership. These are absolutely different signals that are directed in opposite directions. One to come out of reforms, and one concerning implementation of reforms. And maybe Andrei will tell you more about what is going on in the defense sector. But I believe, unfortunately, during 1.5 or 2 years, we significantly, especially during last year, we reduced our reform agenda in the defense sector. Repeatedly during me being on this position, we wanted to implement a program, and we wanted and the most ambitious program that we started to develop, and we oriented it to the results. And in 2019, in September, we had it for 2020, and it was adopted only in May 2020. And this doesn't show that proper priority is given to this matter, and the control and the monitoring of implementation is lacking. So good words are said concerning oversight over security and defense sector, but this example of Wagner case, we initiated the creation of the special group in the parliament in order to investigate Wagner case. In this case, the work of one committee is not enough. We need real parliamentary control by different political forces that would allow to balance and provide impartiality and to get the answer what we have as of today and why the operation failed. And I agree with Valery. it is difficult for us to build, starting 2014, to rebuild this trust, not only to our goals and attempts, and to prove that we are capable to implement our tasks, and to establish trust in order that our partners cooperate with us in the most sensitive things. And we should provide proper answer to Ukrainian society. Otherwise, there will be additional questions from the side of our partners. And this trust that was built, it may fail and we will go to zero. And this is really painful. Sometimes I feel that our movement to Euro-Atlantic Alliance, this move looks like orbit track. We have our pressure heightened, our hands and legs are moving, but we do not go anywhere. And this is really of concern. Our joint efforts should result in our perception of proper changes, and we all should share those positive things that we were able to reach. And we should speak in one voice and to insist on political decisions from our partners. And those political signals that Ukraine sends. 1 year ago, we heard from the new Minister of Defense that Ukraine is not capable to implement the standards of NATO. And at the end of the year, the same minister says that we demand a membership action plan on the summit of NATO 2021. So these are signals that do not help to perceive us seriously. And Ukraine, as a real frontier of the Western world, we deserve. We have proper experience. We have opportunities. We deserve to be the members of Western civilized community. At the end, I would like to say that the process of accession to NATO, this is the task, political task, security, defense task. It has all the opportunity to be the main driver for all other political processes in the country, including ruining of political annihilation that is in our executive bodies concerning constitutional crisis, and also reforms are needed in the courts and judiciary, and there should be transparent practices of building of anti-corruption instruments. These questions are on the agenda, and here we should unite our efforts to the maximum. This demands a fair answer to ourselves where we are now, not only some reporting about laws, draft laws that are unfortunately do not work now. Thank you very much. So you've raised very important issues, and we have people here who clearly understand these issues. Alena Getmachkov, Oleksandr Lytvynenko, Andrei Zagorodnyuk. So you've mentioned some political aspects. I would like to give the floor to the person that from one side, I believe, in this commission or in this delegation of the Parliamentary Assembly of NATO, Ukraine, you all work as one. And Yegor represents also the leading party, the ruling party. You may respond politically, or you may respond as a member of delegation, but I personally would like you to speak about the next steps of the meeting of our delegation and the Parliamentary Assembly in order to understand what to prepare to. You are given the floor. Thank you very much for this invitation. Thank you for giving me the floor. I would like to briefly respond to some arguments of Ivana. I disagree. Concerning the fact that we are not moving forward, and about implementation and legislative work, and the laws came into being. There are some draft laws and laws concerning SBU. And Mr. Minister a year ago said not about that they are not waiting us in NATO, that we are facing the long way and we need a lot of changes. And this is not only about security and defense, this is also about anti-corruption and the reform of judiciary. And here there are some results, especially concerning anti-corruption institutions that came into being. Anti-corruption court in 2019, it was launched, and some draft laws concerning criminal responsibility. Constitutional Court that in 2019. So we are moving forward. Can we do it faster? Yes, maybe. We are not standing on one place. And the signal that we are integrating with the NATO countries is that we are getting enhanced opportunity partnership from NATO. This is the last step to the membership action plan. This is the last, the final program. Ukraine could join before practical getting of membership action plan. The last one is membership action plan, and as Mr. Ambassador said, that this is a more political issue, even geopolitical issue. This is not about the implementation of the annual program that was approved later on, and it was based on the new principles of resource management with new KPIs. It is person-centered, and I would like to go back to geopolitical area and speak about membership action plan. This should be collective decision of member states of NATO to provide the membership action plan for Ukraine. This should be a decision ratified by the parliaments of the countries that are member states of NATO, and the delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of NATO plays a big part in this, because we should speak with the deputies. We should bring to them the idea that we are really deserving, that we are reliable partners for the alliance. And here it is really important to have one voice policy, to be absolutely united, to have single voice on the international arena, despite what political power we represent. Inside the country, we may do different things, criticize each other, speak about problems. We may have debates on TV channels, but when we speak at the international level, we should speak in one voice, and we should not send mixed messages about what is going on inside the country. I believe that it's not a secret. It's clear that in the issues of joining NATO, we are united in opposition and in the party of power. We understand that this is our way. We do not have differences on this. Unfortunately, because of information attacks on some TV channels, we see decrease of support to our movement to NATO. Last year, nearly at this time, we had 53% of support, the highest support of the citizens of Ukraine. Now we have about 50%. And this decrease, it was provoked, first of all, by internal information attacks, by pro-Kremlin channels. Thank God they are closed now, and I hope that they won't renew their activity. Because this is pro-Kremlin work to discredit NATO in Ukraine and our way to NATO. Summing up, I would like to say, what about the plans? Yes, I will speak about this. So the Parliamentary Assembly should have taken place in Kiev, and this is an important event for Ukraine, because about 300 deputies from the countries of member states and partners, they should have come to Ukraine and to speak about the issues that are on the agenda, and they would be able to get more information about Ukraine, because there is distortion of information because of Russian propaganda in some countries. And there are some tense relationship with some countries. And we are preparing for 2022. In May, we will have this event. This was postponed due to COVID. And I believe that before this, we will get better results in our movement to NATO, and there will be proper implementation and adoption of laws. And in several hours, we will have a meeting of Ukrainian and NATO Interparliamentary Commission. This is one of the instruments of interparliamentary cooperation that holds its meetings twice a year, and there we share information about our movement. I have hope that after changes are made in the administration of USA, and there are clear signals from US for intensification of relationship with NATO, and also when Jerry Connery is the representative of US, and the previous presidents also expressed their great support for Ukraine, and they were on the side of Ukraine, and I hope that our cooperation will intensify and our cooperation will be closer. And I believe that we have this that we will have this window of opportunity to get membership action plan in the nearest future. So a brief comment from me. Pandemic, we live in it, and we have events. Today we have Ukraine 30, and there is all the government who participate. They are all in masks, like we are here, and the USA, and the president confirmed this. Joseph Biden said that in April they will have a big summit, not online. It will be done in person. And NATO's defense structure, they should not cancel the meetings, and you should insist to have such events this year. You should not postpone them, because we do not know what will happen in the future. Now we have this window of opportunity. And the parliament And I believe also the Parliament should get information from the Verkhovna Rada, and he should have information from the Parliament in order to speak with the President of US on the summit that will happen on the 22nd, 23rd of April to show the roadmap of our partnership. That would be great, and time is lacking. And I believe that one of the results of our round table, we may hand over to you those materials, those ideas that may be implemented. I would like to hear from you. I would like to comment about online event concerning Parliamentary Assembly. So this decision was taken at the start of pandemic. No one understood what would happen, and we were in constant communication with the Secretariat of the Parliamentary Assembly, and they proposed to hold two-day meeting between different parliamentary sessions. But in this way, we wouldn't be able to speak about Ukraine properly in order to provide proper information to our international partners. That's why we planned this meeting for 2022. Parliamentary assemblies are planned for several years ahead. So last year, in fall, this was in Athens, then it will be in Sweden, then in Portugal, and only in 2 years it will be in Ukraine, and no country wanted to exchange with us to change those dates, so we had only 2022. So we are in constant communication. We have bilateral meetings with parliamentarians of member states, and we have these meetings online on a constant basis. Thank you very much for this information that you provided. And I share this opinion that we should speak in one voice at the international arena. And we have here Canadian representative, and Canada is really friendly to us. So the truth is the truth. And if the Minister of Defense say this phrase, and it is perceived by society as that he is not sure that we are able to implement the standards, do not protect him. And Mr. Zagorodnyuk commented on this, that such declarations raise concerns. So this was the 15th Defense Minister of Ukraine, Mr. Zagorodnyuk. So now give the floor to the head of Center of Defense and Strategy. I won't comment on that case, but maybe you should comment on this. We should understand this. What was said by Taran, Mr. Taran, Minister Taran, maybe you should invite him. Yes, we invited Mr. Taran, and he didn't come, and he didn't send anyone. The main is that the President, after this and half year after this event, a strategy of national security was adopted, and this transition to the standard was included in the strategy, and the President ordered the minister and others not to raise this issue of concern, and all the rhetoric of the ministry, this is about the standards, about the NATO accession. So membership action plan, this is political decision. It is not connected formally with the standards. We should demonstrate to our partners that we are transfer into these standards, we should not only speak about these standards, we should implement them. There are some things that we may do at other fronts. We should develop and lobby our issues in the countries that do not have clear idea about our accession. And I had the opportunity to speak with the head of the alliance. They like the idea of our accession, but not all the countries support our membership. For example, such powerful country as France, and our diplomats, they should work with them. Our officials should lobby this decision. We did it for enhanced opportunity partnership. This is not easy. You should find a key to each country in order to open the consent for Ukrainian accession. We need ambassador to NATO. We do not have this position now because the representatives of our office in Brussels, they are not able to enter some events because they do not have ambassador status. They are not able to attend some meetings. So some meetings are open only for those who have the status of ambassador. And we have professionals concerning international relations and diplomacy. They will comment on this. We need civil control, otherwise we won't have NATO membership. This is a very important issue, practical one. Many people do not know what this civil control means. This is not about white books. This is not about parliamentary control. That is also not in full force. And Ірина Friz in 2018, she complained that the minister of Ukraine in London do not attend the meetings of the committee. And I understood that this depends on the will of the minister, and I was really surprised. We were not obliged to do this. We did it because we respected them. And Mariana represented the committee, and they have aggressive attitude towards any attempts not to provide information or not to come. But they act in the framework of their responsibilities. And when the law is taken on defense procurement, and there was a big drama and opposition for known reasons, and it happened in August, and no bylaws were developed or implemented, and 1st January it entered into effect, and they call on they speak with so we got enhanced opportunity partnership. It provides a lot of opportunities, but we don't use this instrument. And our armed forces are not controlled in a proper way. Armed forces, in accordance with the law that was adopted in 2018, it dilutes the command structure, and we have a lot of reports from the from foreign experts, and they are not classified. That's why I may provide them to you, concerning the fact that our laws do not meet the standards concerning civilian control. And we implemented the law, but it was lost in the corridors with the change of the law on security, concerning this building the command vertical. So we handed over this draft law, and it was stopped somewhere in the parliament. We know about the conflicts between the armed forces, they do not know how to be commanded by the government properly. It is difficult to speak about NATO if we face situation with civilian control like this. So the armed forces are under command of the president, this one and the previous one. I respect all the politicians, but the matter is the president physically cannot control the army. He has a lot of different tasks. Even when he deals with the issues of army, he doesn't have all needed instruments to be able to properly control the army and to effect this civilian control. And on behalf of civil society, he cannot do this. No matter what wonderful people he has in his administration, there should be proper system developed, but we do not have proper vertical power. So the minister cannot provide sanctions against some officials, and this minister and the previous one, they may remind to adhere to obligations, but no one knows what it is. So we should build a clear system, how civil society, parliament, the government, this is not about the ministry. The government, they should be able to control armed forces. Otherwise, we won't be able to enter NATO. Thank you very much for these details. I would like to say one thing as a person who was on both sides. I was in power and in civil society. My feeling of today, it is subjective. The control during previous years, even in difficult conditions, the period of Yanukovych, Kuchma rule, the control over armed forces by civil society, it was stronger than today. This is not about change of power. I agree with you. The civilian control, we do not pay attention to it. So reforms started, there were some steps, and as Mariana said, everything is okay, we are working. The structures are needed. I remember the press conference in 1996 when there was briefing of civil society, and the general staff head came to the briefing, and this was about the reform of the army. And this was the deputy head of headquarters. He works in all powers. He said, what right NGOs have to speak about security and defense? And General said, in Europe, in the world, this is discussed. No one asks such questions now. So this year we have the opportunity, we see that Georgia may get the membership action plan this year. Thank you very much. We may speak a lot. Why moving through reforms, this issue remain. Even the Ministry of Defense and the Minister of Defense, they file to the court against each other. So this is the culture of doing things. But we won't be able to speak about all these questions. They are really important for us.
I had been postponing the floor to Ms. Stefanchuk, who is head of the Center, the New Europe. You have heard a lot of issues discussed today. You participated in many discussions and heard many politicians, many experts. So I would like to ask you once again, the window of opportunity as to the membership action plan. Perhaps we won't be able to reach the level which Georgia has in terms of the membership action plan, but nevertheless, what do you think on this issue, and what should the authorities do, in your opinion, to get this action plan? Valerie, thank you for invitation to this discussion. I'm always happy to discuss our accession to NATO. As for the membership action plan, I'm not sure that this is the window of opportunity. As an expert, I do not see such a window. When the membership action plan for Georgia is being discussed, I'm a bit surprised. I have doubts. Why are you so much sure that this year Georgia is going to get the membership action plan? Why everybody is so sure? Why you keep saying that Ukraine won't catch the train this year? My vision, which I demonstrated last year, and when we joined the Enhanced Opportunity program, in that publication, I suggested to look more closely at the year 2023, thinking about sufficient time for consultations, just to make and ensure the sufficient time for detox period, so to say, because it seems to me that Ukraine's membership action plan remains rather toxic issue for many NATO members. On the other hand, thinking for the future, I would first ensure that Ukraine would be able to implement the possible membership action plan efficiently when it is given to Ukraine, because all the opportunities that we were given back in 2014, 2016, which we never used, and in 2003, the membership of Volodymyr Zelensky will approach to its end, and he would have a chance to make Ukraine a candidate member country, and this would be a great opportunity for him. On the other hand, keeping in mind the new administration in the United States, and of course, new U.S. President paid attention at the NATO membership in general, but what are the reasons for us to think that the U.S. administration would support Ukraine's aspirations as to the U.S.? On the one hand, Mr. Blinken, the State Secretary, stands for membership of Georgia and Ukraine's membership, more for Georgia membership action plan, but there are some people in NATO, like Mr. Belbirds, who is very skeptical, who believe that this could be the destabilization factor for NATO. I do not see any optimistic attitude from Mr. Blinken when it comes to Ukraine's membership action plan. He mentioned about Georgia, but Ukraine is not in the discourse of Mr. Blinken. So we have to bring back Ukraine into this discourse. We have to cooperate with Georgia and interact, and we have to keep in mind two types of mutual similarities. One is the military. Ms. Klympush-Tsintsadze mentioned the contradictory signals which were shown by Ukraine in the past. And unfortunately, I have to say that this continues. For example, we have absent the head of Ukraine's mission to NATO. We do not have any decrees on this issue. Let us just produce such a representative of Ukraine. How can we present our vision of the membership action plan when we do not have such a representative of Ukraine's mission to NATO, and we remain in the bad position as to reform of SBU. All this confirms that we continue to produce contradictory signals to NATO as to our readiness to move towards it. Moreover, we look at our priorities with NATO, but we do not think carefully what top priorities NATO could see in cooperation with Ukraine. If we are thinking about membership action plan, we should present it as a way to speed up reforms in Ukraine, that it is needed for reforms in Ukraine. If we can find this connection, this interdependence between reforms and the action plan, then the Western administrations, the allies, may find it useful. For example, the Biden's administration may see it as useful. To cooperate with European partners, we should look carefully at the results of the opinion poll, public opinion poll, which was led in Western countries. For example, in France, 40% of the French people support Ukraine's membership in NATO. Whether this was properly communicated to Mr. Macron, I have doubts. This suggests that the Frenchmen are not that skeptical about Ukraine's membership in NATO, as it is sometimes presented by Western politician leaders. And there's rather high figures suggest that this data might be presented to the leadership. So I do not see any political will at the top level in Ukraine as to Ukraine NATO membership, and let us rethink how we may integrate all those 5 levels: political, diplomatic level, security level, defense level, and civil society level. In my blog, I asked a question to Mr. Zelensky, what he is doing to stick with his promise to promote NATO membership in Eastern Ukraine, as it was stated during his presidential campaign. We should stand for the well-informed support of NATO membership instead of emotional support for NATO membership, which was existent in the first months and years of Russian aggression. So we have to act jointly. I mean, the authorities, people in power, and civil society. So when I do, to sum up, I do not see any window of opportunity, huge window of opportunity for Ukraine. But we should focus our strive for NATO integration, and we have much to do in this area. We have to work in this area. Thank you. You raised some issues, and actually you had answered some issues. Your Excellency, I understood you wanted to comment.
That I think that the focus on the membership action plan, as you say, it will give momentum, it'll unite, it'll bring more consensus and energy to the reform project in Ukraine. So if you don't get it, is that the excuse for going slower? I think it's really important not to put that kind of a stake on it, and to talk about how every single step towards the fulfillment of the annual national plan, every single ounce of opportunity that you seize with the Enhanced Opportunities Program, these are important steps for Ukraine and for Ukrainians, and that's the success. The road, дорога собі розстелиться, but those success celebrated rather than potentially setting up some kind of a goal whose achievement Ukraine doesn't control, and the signal that sends. So that would be my. I agree with everything that you said, except that one little point.
Thank you. Це довгий.
Of course, I agree that this is a long path, and the speed of our progress is the problem. Of course, we had moved forward and passed a long way from the first question of the one of the first Ukrainian presidents, what to do with NATO early in Ukrainian independence, to the final question, why Ukraine is still not in NATO. I think from the diplomatic point of view, from professional point of view, why Ukraine is still not in NATO. This is quite unpolite and form. It sounds like an ultimatum, and it should not be articulated or formulated this way. Actually, we mentioned today that at a first glance, it looks like rather perfect situation. We have a strategy, and Mr. Lytvynenko knows quite well that one thing is to have something on paper, and another thing is how to implement what is on paper. So the question to you: when you look at the new strategy and when you look on the new draft, which is now being drafted as to the new foreign policy strategy of Ukraine, how do you think whether these new clear plans may help, whether the new strategy of the national security may help in Ukraine's movement towards NATO? And the question to you: what is the key structure in Ukraine today as to the strategy, and which is prepared to become a coordinator, whether it should be the president, whether it should be the government, whether it should be the National Security and Defense Council, who should be such a coordinator, or the nation. So I'm giving the floor to the director of the National Institute of Strategic Research. First of all, I would like to thank you for this discussion, for broad representation of the panelists. And before answering your questions, I would like to answer the main question that you posed for today: why Ukraine is not a member of NATO till today. First of all, NATO is a military and political alliance aimed at the defense and security of its members. So the decision about the country's accession to membership is based on the consideration whether the country's membership would strengthen the security and defense of the alliance member. Thinking about this vision, we have to prove to our partners that Ukraine's accession will provide good advantages more advantages to them than disadvantages, and this brings us to an elephant in the room, because there is the Russian Federation politics that never ever Ukraine would join NATO. And keeping that in mind, when you listen to the position of any Russian politicians, whether they are democratic or pro-governmental, they keep saying that Ukraine would never ever be the NATO membership, and this could be the most radical, say even the pretext for the war. So we have to convince our partners that should take this risk, and we have to prove that Ukraine's accession to NATO would strengthen that security instead of the threat of war. So while Ukraine's non-membership in long-term perspective drastically decreases the European capacity to defend itself in long-term perspective, As for the strategy could be written and you can write as many strategies as possible. The only thing is how to implement them. Although the strategy has its goal of stating has its role of stating the goals, then it gives the trend, the direction for the governmental servants and civil servants, and whether we have any positive signs about this national security strategy. Yes, the minister mentioned that the law on national security is not perfect, but it provides strategic directions, and we try to implement it more or less. In the strategy of national defense, we have the membership action plan as one of the items. Whether this is realistic or not, we do not know, but we set it as the strategy for our foreign political activity. Discussing whether it is all doable. Do we have issues with implementation? Yes, of course. I would not point out to media, I wouldn't point out to the civil society. I would point out to the two centers, two gravitations in our executive authority. Then again, when we speak about the implementation of NATO standards, but here we have to clearly understand that before entering NATO, we have to strengthen ourselves. And here the NATO standards come. For us, it is more important to become stronger ourselves and then enter NATO. We have to reformat. We have to reformulate our request as to the NATO membership action plan into the request to assist us in application of NATO standards, and then rely more on that. And eventually, I would ask to emphasize the most important issue, in my opinion, for us, the true transformation, true changes in the security and defense area, true strengthening of our capacity is of primarily importance, because unlike NATO members who are members of the NATO alliance, we do not have allies. We have only parties. Your Excellency, I am very grateful for the support of Ukraine, but we cannot speak about any commitments made by the allies. That's why we have to cooperate with NATO with the extended comprehensive assistance plan, etc. That is to rely on the instruments and tools which are available and offered by NATO. And let us focus on what on the instruments which we already have. Here, I fully agree with Alona. That we have to make a good use of the instruments, of the tools, of the programs which we already have. And here I primarily keep in mind that the proper use, proper application of those tools is much more important than the use of some instruments that are not accessible. I would like to point out that you are not a politician. Which structure should now be the key structure? In line with legislation, we have a committee. We have a committee on Euro-Atlantic integration, and here Ms. Klympush-Tsintsadze is the best familiar with its activity. In my opinion, we have to force the cabinet of ministers to be very closely involved into the NATO membership activity, and the president should be more involved in this governmental work. I believe that traditionally we had a good platform for discussions of NATO integration in the government. I think we have only one institute on the issue in Ukraine, so we expect that governmental analytical think tank, you will devote your attention to this issue. Thank you. If you allow me, I would say one more thing, that implementation is the main thing. We have to be happy with what we have, and let us make a good use of what we have. But the truth is that we have to be proactive and demonstrate that we want to be proactive. And during my term as the ambassador of Ukraine to US, I was also active as Ukraine's representative to NATO. And I think that today we have to state that we have already paid a big price at the eastern flank of NATO. We had sacrificed 3,000 lives of our military in the east, and request for the NATO membership action plan. And I believe that the problems still exist. The European Solidarity faction keeps saying that this is important, and here I would like to give the floor to Ms. Ірина Friz, the Member of Parliament from European Solidarity faction and the former government commissioner or minister on the in the Veterans Affairs. Do you feel that Ukraine's contribution as the country at the eastern flank of NATO is valued?
I hope that integration of Ukraine to NATO would be so strong as my attempt to get here today. So integration to NATO is the process. This is time to carry out efficient reforms. Also, they said that NATO is not a bonus, this is obligation. Obligation that we undertake as a state, as a candidate or member in the future that should share the values protected by the alliance. Also, NATO is mutual help. And we should have active and even proactive position, as it was done by Georgia, to become contributors, not only the eastern flank of the alliance, but the contributor to Euro-Atlantic sector. Our integration, I believe, will speed up. This is my opinion. A spontaneous proposition from Ukraine to use military airports in our western part to carry out joint training. This will improve our interoperability and will allow us to test quality of implemented standards. In this way, we will be able to integrate at the middle level. We have good indicators in armed forces. They participate actively in NATO exercises. They get high marks there. And Ganel, they provide monitoring of what is going on in Crimea and Donbas. We may propose the use of our capabilities and military airports in order that these drones, Black Hawk, be able to carry out their operations from the territory of Ukraine, and this may contribute to NATO. We should have proactive position, and not only to implement the standards, we should use specifications of NATO and be active and proactive participants and contributors at this point. I agree with Oleksandr concerning that we should be strong. If we are strong, then NATO will be able to get us. So we should use this in order to provide better integration, not on paper, but to have an integration that is really natural. And this process won't be reversed despite political declarations of politicians that may harm our integration. This integration is envisaged by constitution, but some declarations, ultimatums, people say, for example, why we are not in NATO. So this is an idiotic position, and we are hostages of the situation. We provide explanations, and we should ask proper questions to ourselves why we are not proactive. So as Valery mentioned, this contribution, these losses, we as the Ministry of Veterans Affairs, we studied experience of US and Croatia. Our military capability, human potential, we do not use them enough because we have people who are really strong in their spirit, and we should bring this idea to our partners. They should see that our country defends itself and how we defend our defenders as a state. We should have proactive position, and we should not only ask why we are not in NATO. We should be active participants of Euro-Atlantic security, and then the attitude towards us will change. I believe that we, of course, should appoint the ambassador to NATO. And when we were in power, we understood the need to appoint the ambassador. Now the situation is not resolved, and this negatively influences the attitude towards our mission that are at the headquarters of NATO. And this is briefly from me. Thank you for being brief. Black Hawk initiative is enough in order to analyze it in more detail, but there are some questions that should be resolved. So this idea was voiced during the round table. This idea was presented by a person who really understands this initiative. So now this is the end of press conference, and maybe I could provide the floor to each of you, but time is lacking. If you don't mind, with your permit, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Ambassador in order that she provided her opinion, and also to Ms. Klympush-Tsintsadze. This is our joint initiative, and her political will to have this discussion in the period when we mentioned this idea to be envisaged in constitution.
Lots of interesting things. This was, I can't believe 2 hours has already gone by. Very interesting to listen to all of you. And the one thing I hear is a very high degree of self-awareness about what's required, and that self-reflection, and that recognition that Ukraine needs to make itself indispensable to NATO. And there are many, many ways that that can happen, and they shouldn't be difficult. All of the instruments that exist that NATO has are active in Ukraine, and so taking advantage of that is important. I think the last thing that I would say, though, is that, first of all, as a contact point embassy, I fulfill that role for NATO in Ukraine with my colleague Melinda Simmons, the ambassador of the UK. Our job is twofold. It's to speak frankly and productively with authorities, but also to take the message to the people. And I think that there is a desire on the part of authorities and a part of all of you, I think, to show to the people of Ukraine who have sacrificed so much, to show to the people working in the institutions that change that is so difficult is worth it. You want to show accomplishment. And like I said earlier, the accomplishment isn't just the attainment of a membership action plan. The accomplishment is all those little things that are happening. And so the onus, I think, is on all of us, and in fact on the media as well, to show those accomplishments to the people of Ukraine, especially where the message of NATO hasn't been accepted yet. So I think that we need to collectively, including the media, work on making those accomplishments more obvious, more important for that road to NATO, and most importantly, really important for Ukrainians.
Thank you so much. Pani Іванна Климпуш-Цинцадзе.
So, in order to sum up this initiative, this is comes from the platform Women, Security and Peace. We represent this platform together with our colleagues, and we are able to hear each other to reach common understanding how to move forward. I would like to provide a brief response. First, about partnership, about enhanced opportunity partnership. and our role in this. These the attempts of many years that were supported by the power, and we now implement this program. And for me, I believe it's a pity, and Larisa didn't mention this, but it's a pity to hear when we speak with representatives of different countries that are the members of the alliance, we see that Ukraine does not use all the opportunities of the program, and it means that we should maximize those efforts. And civil society, the parliament should contribute and to provide these materials to the executive power in order that it will be able to use it in its activity. It is really important. And I would like to note that a result-oriented program was established due to Canadian program. We launched it. I dealt with these issues personally. This was my flagman initiative, and we held training, 300 people from the ministries, in order that they had this result-oriented approach, and to create a program in a proper way. And we've prepared this program, and it was submitted from the Cabinet of Ministers to the Office of the President. And unfortunately, for a long time, it was not signed. And we should understand that we didn't use all the opportunities in 2020. And we hope that in February it will be adopted for this year, and I do not see the close prospects for this. About information, and I believe that this is our joint task, big task. And this decrease of support of our Euro-Atlantic and European integration, this is not, I mean, in Ukrainian society during the previous years, this is not only the result of the work of the Kremlin information resources in Ukraine. I believe that this is also the result of the fact that we, as a state, at the state executive level, starting from the president of Ukraine, ending with the heads of different cabinets of ministers, in times of Zelensky, we do not clearly articulate where we are moving to, why we need it, and what we bring and what we get from this. Information campaigns that would provide for the explanation of this topic to society, we are lacking them. And this is a joint task for those who believe that European and Euro integration membership this is the task for the parliamentarians and for civil society, for our partners. These are the opportunities for all of us to increase the number of those citizens who clearly understand this. And Alona mentioned this. This is a conscious support. And we will be able to use this support in our further actions. So thank you for summing up. So some impressions from me about what we heard. Repeatedly, we heard that the accession to NATO and membership action plan, these issues may unite us, and for the president, this may be his historic mission. And I believe that this should motivate him for more active actions. Second, we didn't discuss this issue much, but I believe that those opportunities that may open in 4 or 5 years, and I believe that these issues may be more difficult. This is maybe for separate discussion. This is my subjective view. So this window of opportunity that we discuss during many years I know from my experience, our work as a deputy of Minister of Foreign Affairs and ambassador to US, as a member of civil society, I understand that now we have one thing that changed everything. This is aggression of Russian Federation against Ukraine and our real contribution to defense and security of Europe. What will happen in the future? This is a separate discussion. And now we have this window of opportunity for Ukrainian side, our partners, and we thank the ambassador that she told us clearly and openly what we should do now. So this is our home task. And we believe that this will be a political decision. We should work with each of the countries, with each of the member states. And having my experience concerning negotiations of these issues, member states, they should not exchange their interests for security ones. We know the country we think about in this case. And this country also is active in the high echelons. So this discussion with such composition of participants, I now hear many interesting ideas, and in the Institute of Strategic Research, these issues will be worked on further, and I hope that representatives of the ministry will attend our further meetings, and the general headquarters also will participate, not only them, but the Ministry of Finances and the Ministry of Economy, what budgets are allocated, what weapons we buy, and the countries from which we buy, how they respond to our issues. All these matters should be discussed. One word from me. At the end of February, with the support of NATO office in Ukraine, we will hold a serious roundtable concerning infrastructure and our resilience. And we will hold on standards, the event on the standards of NATO in March. And Ukraine Crisis Media Center will highlight not only the issues, not only current issues, what we do. We provide this platform, and we thank all those who support broadcasting, translation, and organization of this event. And we thank our technical staff and all those who participated in this work. We thank you for holding this event, and only by joint effort we may implement strategic goals of Ukraine. And I wish everyone